From EPAWA Weather Consulting, headquartered in Worth Whitehall, Pennsylvania, this is Weather Weeklies, an informative video of the ins and outs of weather that affect you most in the EPAWA coverage area. The thoughts and opinions expressed in this video are those of the forecaster alone and may not reflect those of the staff of EPAWA Weather Consulting LLC as a whole, nor its constituents. Now, without further ado, here is meteorologist Bobby Martrich with Weather Weeklies.
Good Sunday morning to another edition of Weather Weeklies for Sunday, December 26th. We're getting a little bit of a late start today because we're on holiday schedule right now, so things are moving a little bit slower. Actually, I had some things I was looking at for shorter term things, and I got a little preoccupied. But hope everybody had a fantastic Christmas holiday, and Santa was good to you. We are going to move on normal schedule now for today, and then going forward. As far as, schedule for next week, we're going to have a repeat of this week, so we won't be open on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. So other than that, we're pretty much normal going forward. So today we're going to talk about the upcoming pattern, and listen, I've been talking about this a pattern change for a while. I'm getting a lot of pushback from that because people either read what they want to read, hear what they want to hear, listen to somebody else spewing BS that think they know what they're talking about, or they are looking at models and taking it at face value. Because the models flip around a lot, and everybody knows that, right? So, I don't really... I use models as a guide during long-range outlooks, but it is not the primary component of my long-range outlooks. And people are like, well, how do you do that? Well, it's a proprietary thing. I don't really like to get into that, but there's a reason why our long-range forecasts have been so successful. Now, they are probabilistic in nature. They're not deterministic. So if I say, at the end of November, I think we're going to have a pattern change between Christmas and New Year's, and it ends up being January 3rd instead, that's not a big deal. But all of a sudden, it's the end of the world in weather Twitter and everywhere else. But it's not a big deal. But I finally said the end of last week, I'm tired of you bothering me about this. January 3rd is the day I said. I said a deterministic day of when the pattern change was going to come, and it wasn't probabilistic anymore. So I maintained that here on in our latest long-range outlook. Okay, so there it is. There's our long-range outlook where it shows that the pattern finally changing from this above average, or mostly above average pattern that we're going to be in for much of this next week and then the first day or two of January. And then after that, we are more consistently below average. That doesn't mean we're every day below average during, going to the end of winter. That doesn't mean that. It does mean that the majority of that time, sans a quick, maybe brief return to near average right around the 5th, 6th time frame ahead of a reinforcing cold front, you're below average after that. And look at this, slightly below average. You got in there also. And it goes through the end of January. And then you might have a near average period to start the month of February. Pretty cut and dry, right? Well, over the weekend, and after I was getting all this pushback from this, I was getting the models, or the ensembles were starting to come toward my ideas that I had originally. I never wavered from it. I said, you know what, this is going to be it, and that's it. And at the time, the models were like, no, it's not going to be January 3rd. You're full of it. Well, now they're saying it's January 3rd. Amazing how that works, isn't it? When they come into your ideas. Here's what our snowfall is in December and January. Obviously, December is going to be below average. In some cases, none at all. But we have slightly above still projected for the month of January. I think January is going to be a month where you get some snow chances back into the region again, finally, after we have been in a drought thus far. But in December, pitiful, right? Okay, now we do have a minor wintry threat coming in here. And this is what I was looking at this morning and why I was delayed a little bit. There's a little bit, this is the NAM 3 kilometer, showing tomorrow as we get into late morning through about midnight or thereabout. A little bit of onset snowflakes and then some spotty light freezing rain or drizzle that's going to take place mainly along I-78 and north of there. I want to get a better look at this before we start sending alerts for it, because we're dealing with some icing here. Now, this isn't a lot of icing. We're talking about a couple hundredths of an inch up to maybe a tenth would be the most, tenth of an inch, which any amount of ice can cause problems. So I want to keep an eye on this and see what this does. But this might be something we send out Monday morning as far as text alerts go, and not today, because there's a lot of some of the global models are showing a little bit more snow on the front end, like according to an inch of snow going over to some spotty light freezing rain and drizzle. NAM's really not showing that so much just yet, but I don't know that that's right. You might just get a burst of snow at the beginning and then quick dusting or something like that, and then go over to some spotty light freezing rain or drizzle. We'll keep an eye on that, though. Week to week, we have been showing what the La Nina has been doing, and it's still, the La Nina regions are still falling in overall in these temperatures, and it is still a basin-wide La Nina, as you can see here, favoring the eastern areas for the coolest waters, anomalously speaking, okay? This is compared to average. These are the areas we're concerned about right in here, and that is your La Nina. But it is heavier or colder in our far eastern areas of Niña 3 and Niña 1 and 2. Very similar to Christmas Day in 2017. You had the same thing. It's still weighted east here, further east. You saw the cold pull up in here, but it's a basin-wide La Nina. So we're still on track for that 2017 comparison. Okay, we're still on track for that, so I don't see a reason to change the analog, at least, going into January, but we'll see where we progress from this point. I'm worried more about what's going to happen intra-seasonally, and that is with the Matt and Julian oscillation and some other things I'm going to talk about here today. Now, again, I'm not here to blow smoke up your ass. I'm not going to do that. If it's not going to snow, it's not going to snow. If the pattern's not going to change, it's not going to change, but I do think it does, and I'm just going to continue to say that. Because there are intra-seasonal changes that are just go beyond what the models show. So the models will show, one run they'll show like something that agrees with my ideas. The next run it might go back to, well, now the pattern change is not till January 8th or whatever. It's possible that they keep moving back and forth because they're having trouble deciphering the pattern a little bit. Now they're starting to come a little bit closer. And I would say if you're somebody that follows the models closely, don't look at the operational runs. The GFS, the European model, the Canadian model, when we're dealing with long-term projections of temperatures. You want to look at the ensembles for that, not the operational runs. The operational runs are going to go every 6 hours, okay? The ensemble is going to be a little more consistent and give you a better idea of what the temperature pattern is going to be going forward. Because if you have 30 or 50 additional members running, and you blend that mean together of those 30 or 50 members, depending on what model you're looking at, it's better than just having one to look at, right? Because you have a consensus, basically, of that mean to give you the idea of the temperature. So if you're looking at temperatures long range, look at the ensembles, okay? Forget the operational runs and stop messaging me about the operational runs showing something different than what we have projected. I have a reason for this, and I'm going to go into some of the technical stuff here. So the Matt and Julian oscillation is one of them. It is an intra-seasonal 30 to 45 day cycle, actually 45 to 60 day cycle of temperature patterns, okay? So this is intra-seasonal, within a season, okay? You can have different fluctuations in patterns because of this. Now, phase 7 in December is not a very good pattern, as you can see to the right to me. And that's what we're having this final week, and heading into the very first day or two of January is going to be like this as well, where you have mostly rain events. You're going to have a lot of that this week. You might have some wintry components to them on certain days, like Monday, maybe the start of precipitation on Wednesday, for our far northern areas, just onset wintry, but it's not a winter storm, okay? But we are going to be moving through phase 7. The forecast is eventually to take into phase 8. I'm a little skeptical of phase 8, but it might get there eventually, but that's not really a big deal right now. If we get in phase 7 in January, it takes on completely different meaning from what it does in December. Here's phase 7 in a negative ENSO, which is La Nina year, in the month of January. And that's a lot different. Okay? So if we're moving through phase 7 in January, whether we get to 8 or not doesn't really matter as much. You might be cutting down to the big storm potential that you would see in phase 8 typically. But, at least this is colder than average temperatures, and that's a start. Okay, I've been saying all along, you need to have, in order to have snow, you're going to have to change the pattern so it's more consistently colder than average. Well, how do we do that? Well, right now, you're not doing that. Right now, you're not. This is the upper air pattern as we're looking at it right now, okay? Some key features here that I want to point out to you. So if you're following the ensembles, this is what this is, the European ensemble. This is the 500 millibar level at 18,000 feet, which drives everything at the surface, okay? So I'm going to stop my face and talk from moving here and just draw here. Okay, so these are the key features that we're talking about. You have the biggest one here is this ridge that goes into the Aleutians and southern Alaska, okay? You have a big area of low pressure that's sitting here over Japan, okay? You have a negative NAO right here, which really isn't doing anything because you have the whole rest of the pattern in the Pacific in the North Pacific is completely the opposite of what you want to see it. So the cross-polar flow that you're getting is coming in, but it's going right and diving right into the western United States, okay? We are on this side of it, we get a ridge, okay, or semi-ridge anyway, and you get milder temperatures. That's right now, okay? Now there's some changes out in this. This is what one of the things I'm talking about. I'm not going to get into too much detail because there's some things we do in long range that are proprietary. But if you're trying to learn something, this is China right here, okay? Watch what happens here. Now, this is this morning. This is this morning in China. And you're like, why are we talking about China? Well, this is important. This is a positive East Asian mountain torque where you have very high pressure over eastern China, okay? This has some downstream effects on some things, and this is what gets the pattern to change. I don't care what the models are going to tell you. Although they're starting to come to agreement to this idea finally. They're finally moving in that direction. But this, when you see things that are observed, this is this morning. This is not made up. This is happening, okay? So this is a classic positive East Asian mountain torque. Mountain torque events play a critical role in atmospheric angular momentum. So it's the flux from the tropics to the mid-latitudes, and it signals a pattern change in the North Pacific. Now you're, well, what the hell is atmospheric angular momentum? Well, that's just a measure of the rotation of the atmosphere around the Earth's axis. So the speed of the Earth, it goes around, and then you have the atmosphere moving relative to that. Okay, that's your atmospheric angular momentum. There's times that it is faster, and there's times that it's slower. Okay, a positive East Asian mountain torque, as shown here, it creates a cross-barrier pressure gradient force that opposes the Earth's rotation, and it actually slows it down a little bit. So the atmosphere then compensates by speeding up to conserve angular momentum, and you get a North Pacific jet extension. And it's going to change. This is all physics stuff here. This is all if A, then B. Now, these are not blanket East Asian mountain torque episodes are not all the same, okay? But there is a lot of things that are involved. The angular momentum is cooperating with this and working in tandem with this that I think is going to change the jet configuration downstream. So this is what we have right now in the North Pacific jet. Okay, here you see it right here. See that? That's the North Pacific jet. Again, you have troughiness over here over Japan, all right? And then you have this ridge that's just south of the Aleutians and south of Africa. So on the east side of this, what comes up must come down, like a roller coaster, right? So on the jet, responds by getting the western U.S. and western Canada very cold. And you get a big trough out here and a negative PNA. And there's been a lot of talk about this PNA and like, oh, that's killing our pattern. It's killing our pattern. In a sense, it is. You can get some marginal events in that kind of setup like we're going to have this week that are timed right, but you don't want to sit here and have to in order to get a snow event, try to pull teeth to get it, okay? You want to be able to have the cold air established, so there's really not a question. It's just a matter of how much and where the tracks and all that kind of stuff. In this pattern we're in right now, it's not very good. Okay, so this East Asian mountain torque is going to change things with that jet. And I'm going to move this forward so you can see this. Start at that same point. Watch what happens as I move this forward. East Asian mountain torque episode will send that flux eastward, and then the atmospheric angular momentum will also head poleward. And watch what this does. Instead of hanging south of the Aleutians, it builds into eastern Siberia and builds, this is the ridge, builds into the Arctic Ocean. Well, that's a lot different. Look at your jet extension now, going all the way across the Pacific. You no longer have a negative PNA here. This is getting out into the first week of January and continues beyond that. Big ridge established up here, right? A long jet extension in response to that atmospheric angular momentum going poleward. And it all started with the East Asian mountain torque. I know that's a lot of information. You're probably like, pfft. But there's things that we can see that are observed to make this what is going to be downstream. Okay, so we're not relying on models to figure this out. It's nice that the models are starting to come into agreement. We use them as guidance to say, okay, well, now that's great. This is what it should be doing. And guess what? Now they're showing it doing it. Okay, so what's the bottom line with that? What's the bottom line? And again, that's just a basic overview. I know you're probably like, basic? That's basic? Yes. That's a basic overview of how those two work in tandem and then create this long North Pacific jet extension with time. So what that does, here's your temperature patterns right now. You're warm, and then January 3rd hits. You get cold coming in here into the region. Maybe a brief return to near average around the 5th, 6th, and then you have more cold coming in behind that. Now, you notice this is not excruciating cold in our region, though. And there's a reason for that. A couple reasons. One, there's no snow cover here. So there's nothing that can maintain this further down to the southeast. Once we get snow cover, these will become a little bit more effective, okay? Also, you still have the primary area of deepest cold and troughiest and the cross-polar flow going to be affecting up in these areas first. So it's going to be moderating coming southeast. Okay, now this is the Euro ensemble that just goes through January 9th. What about the GFS ensemble going beyond that, from the 9th onward? Well, now it's suggesting there's going to be some snow on the ground, so these become more effective, and you get some cold maintaining all the way until the 28th of January when this runs out of range. So we're going to have a prolonged colder period. Does that mean it's going to be brutally cold? Absolutely not. Matter of fact, it probably won't be most of the time. Okay, we have slightly below average in January, -1 to -3 projected for the entire month, after being +2 to +4 this month. So that's going to be quite the change. And you're talking about being -1 to -3 Fahrenheit for the month as a whole at a time of year where it is climatologically the coldest point of the year. So you only need near average for it to snow in January anyway. If you're going to be below average, that's bonus, okay? Now, this is not necessarily a pattern of big snowstorms, okay? You could just get a bunch of nickel and diming going in here. That remains to be seen. It doesn't mean you can't get a big snowstorm. You certainly can. But it's not a pattern that is conducive for overall this to say, wow, there's going to be a big blockbuster storm type deal, unless you get into phase 8. And it's possible you can get in there. I don't want to say we're going to definitely get to phase 8 just because the Australian MJO projection says it will. If it does, that's gravy. Okay, that's going to be a big storm pattern. But I don't know that we're going to get there, at least not before the middle of the month. Okay, it's going to be maybe after that, or right around there or after that. It's possible. Okay, and it might be brief. But whether you get there or not, you can still get into a good pattern. Phase 7 in January being better than Phase 7 in December and completely different. That you can still get snow and certainly colder than average. When I'm doing these pattern changes and when I'm talking about a pattern change, I'm not talking about snow. I know that's a subproduct of what's going on, but and I know that's what a lot of people care about, because especially since we haven't had any yet. But I'm more worried about the pattern. Get the pattern to change first, and then everything else follows in line. And I think that's where we're headed. Okay, here's the temperature patterns over the next couple of weeks, and you can see we're certainly largely above average through, it actually says here, the 2nd of January. Look what happens when you hit the 3rd. This is cold enough to snow. You get this near average return here for a day or so, right around the 5th or 6th when you have that cold front moving toward us, a reinforcing front, and then you're right back in the tank again. You're back down to slightly below average temperatures. Again, this is cold enough to snow in most of this period, and then when you go further, deeper into January, it's going to remain right about this, okay? So any of these storms that come in here are going to be largely in the form of snow rather than rain. And this is not speculation. I just went through a whole big spiel today about why this isn't speculation and why I think this is definitely going to happen. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Is this going to be off by a day, maybe? Possibly, I don't know. But, I mean, January 3rd it has been our target date, and I think that's pretty good. GFS is actually trying to bring in a little bit faster. We'll see. We'll see. I think January 3rd is a good day. All right, but from that point forward, at least through the end of January, we're slightly below average for most of it, okay? So as far as storm signals go, the GFS is, this is the GFS ensemble. I was trying to put something in here right around the 3rd or something. It's possible. I think your better chances here are during our listed storm signal between the 7th and 10th of the month. I think you have a storm signal in there. Much more agreement of that period being a little bit more conducive. I mean, the cold's already established, and I think between the 7th and 10th is our next storm signal that is legitimate. We'll have to watch that period around the 3rd, though, that the GFS is trying to suggest, but it's the GFS, and it tries to rush things sometimes, so we'll see. We'll see how that works out, but just don't give up faith. I know we haven't had snow. Some of you had none at all. Maybe a few flakes, trace amounts, or this and that. We have a long way to go yet, all right? And it seems like the past couple of years that our winters have been shifting from December, January, February to January, February, March. Okay, it's if you haven't noticed that, I don't know if that's a climate change thing. I don't know if that's just coincidence, just in the 2010s. But it looks like everything's been kind of pushed off, aside from something, thread the needle that like we had the middle of last December. It's possible. That's why I don't go by these meteorological seasons. I hear this all the time. Oh, it's December 1st. Meteorological winter started. Just wait till actual winter starts. Now we're in winter. Okay, now we can see some changes. So we'll see. All right, but just keep in mind that I'm talking about the pattern overall. Don't expect some big storms. If that happens, great. If you're a snow lover, but it's definitely a pattern that we just get the cold air in here first. That's all we need to do. Once the cold air is in place, then these systems coming in would have a much better chance of being wintry rather than wet. Let's start there first, and I think we're going to start there right around the 3rd of January. So, My Pocket Meteorologist winter subscriptions are still available for sign up. The text alerts and the premium form, you can click on this image below the video on the Weather Weeklies page, or go to this address right up here for EPAWaweather.com/MPM. It'll take you to the general My Pocket Meteorologist page. Look for the winter alerts, and it'll get you all the winter-only alerts on there, and the premium forum subscriptions as well. We will geek it out, talk about all the things like this throughout the week. We'll talk about this and model analysis that are heading up to any storms that come in. I do want to summarize this quickly here so you can move on, since I'm a little bit late today. The La Niña progression will continue to be monitored, building similarities to the 2017-2018 season. I've had this up here every single week because we're continuing to see a comparison to 2017 as far as sea surface temperatures are concerned, and we're going to continue to monitor the Madden-Julian oscillation, the intraseasonal pattern changes, and timing of those waves, as well as changes in the North Pacific Jet and the PNA. I do think that's coming. It's just going to take a little bit in the early January, which, quite frankly, was only 3 days behind our original projection. Is that kicking the can down the road? I don't know. I think people listen to other people out there just, it's going to be a big front-loaded winter, and we're going to get slammed in November and December with snow, and then it doesn't happen, and they lose faith. Just whatever. Milder week overall is expected through January 2nd, and then the pattern changes around this January 3rd, we think. Snow chances begin to come into play when the pattern changes, but it doesn't mean huge snow events are expected necessarily. There could be a lot of nickel and diming. It's quite possible you could be cold and relatively dry. That's possible too. But at least you have let's get the cold in here first, all right? And then we'll deal with what comes after that. You have a much better chance of having a wintry component to these systems rather than being rain like we'll have for the majority of the systems coming in this week as the predominant precipitation type. Again, we'll watch the system coming in here on Monday, and we'll send some text alerts for that today to subscribers. Looks like mainly along and north of 78 for some wintry potential, at least at the onset, and then some lighter rain showers. But it doesn't look like a big deal at all as far as total quantitative precipitation, so it's not a big event. Once we get past the 3rd, we'll see what comes at that point. I'm EPAWA meteorologist Bobby Marchus. That is this edition of Weather Weeklies for Sunday, December 26th. Join us again next week, and hopefully at that time we're talking about pattern change. That should be on our doorstep at that point. Take care.